All right, you must be getting tired of hearing me go off on one again about New York, Debbie, Kawam, and Kathy Hochul. But I wanted to make this this video because there was something that came to my attention about a couple of days ago, actually. So I think it was about a week ago, or maybe 5 or 6 days ago. I noticed that there was a political event that took place on live TV called the State of the State. It's essentially one of those, if you've ever heard of the State of the Nation address, when the president basically makes a bunch of announcements about how well the economy is going and how well their policies are working, stuff like that. Well, State of the State is sort of a miniature version of that for the state, where the state governor and all the elected representatives and government officials basically give an update on how well things are going. And I would have thought, if there's any time to address what happened on the New York subway last year and what they plan to do about it to make sure it can never happen again, it would be something like this. And of course, Kathy Hochul did give a long speech on this event. So I want to talk. You can find it on YouTube if you're curious enough. Although it's kind of mediocre, and honestly, unless you're following the story with a rabid personal interest like I am, then I wouldn't bother. But anyway, I'll just try and summarize what came to mind while I was watching it. So the first half an hour or 40 minutes was plagued with mediocre entertainment. We had this high school marching band playing a medley of 1980s pop songs. Not just, stuff like Eye of the Tiger and Kelly Clarkson, My Life Would Suck Without You. And I have to say, given that it was a government-funded musical performance, it wasn't really that impressive. Like, you could walk down your local high street and hear any high school marching band that sounds just like that, in my opinion. I don't mean any hate to those guys. Maybe they haven't had enough practice, but yeah, it's more or less, I give that a 5 out of 10. Then what else did they have? They had a gospel choir, and they had this dance troupe of old geriatrics doing a really badly synchronized dance routine. The entire time I was watching this, I was thinking, are these guys taking themselves seriously? This is a sort of an event of national importance where we have an elected representative talk about the critical issues that the local economy is facing, how things are going in the state, and a woman's been brutally murdered, and another man was pushed in front of a subway car. Oh yeah, and I think a couple of weeks even after that, there was a homeless man who fought off a bunch of migrants who attacked him, and he stabbed one or two of them, and he to my knowledge, he hasn't been facing any criminal charges. So yeah, the situation seems pretty foobar in New York City right now. But it seems like, based on what I've been seeing so far, with all this silly dancing and this mediocre music, it's like they're not really taking this seriously. But it's more or less exactly what you'd expect. Then, of course, the main event, Kathy Hochul eventually walked onto the scene. And she gave a speech. I can't remember how long it was. Maybe it was 45 minutes, 1 hour. I didn't really listen to all of it. I found a transcript somewhere on the internet. It was just an hour and a half, or however long, of blah, blah, blah. It's perfectly in keeping with the politics of modern times, because politics is 90% pomp and imagery and 10%, maybe even less than that, 10% substance. These politicians, they spend ages furnishing and cultivating this image where they say things that paint themselves in a positive light, and they lie. So when they don't lie outright to our faces, they leave things out of their speech so as to keep up a completely false impression of what's going on. Anyway, if you're confused and puzzled as to what I meant by that, well, as I more or less predicted, the speech went on for quite some time. I can't remember exactly how long. It might have been an hour and a half or whatever. But there was not one mention of Debrina Kawam's death at any point in the speech. There wasn't even a reference to the guy who set her on fire. There wasn't even an oblique reference to the crime itself that happened last year. She did, to be fair, mention a couple of times, she gave a couple of shout outs to the crime epidemic in New York subway, but it was in a very generalized, she gave a very generalized take on crime, like it's, like New York hasn't been experiencing an upsurge in violent crime. She hasn't drawn attention to any of the major incidents that took place over the past few years, like with Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely. You know, again, a lot of what she said, it was vague pointers to things like mentally ill homeless people. She wanted to, you know, make sure that homeless people were getting the help they needed and not left at the mercy of the big city. And New Yorkers need to feel safe from crime and stuff like that. But it's all just, you know, I wasn't convinced by any of it. And it was just, it's so unbelievably surreal. Like, a crime that is that horrific, you would think a woman getting set on fire in broad daylight on a Monday morning in Brooklyn, she would address it. Like, what led to it? What made it possible? She'd maybe give a shout out to the family and the memory of Debbie Kawam, because lots of crime happens in the span of a year. It's a waste of time to go through each and every single one of them. But some crimes are just so horrific, so captivating and mesmerizing, you can't turn your attention away from them. But if you were there in the room, or if you were watching the video from start to finish, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it may as well have never even happened. It's unbelievable. And the audience, they just clapped along like seals to her every word. It's like in an episode of BBC Question Time. I'm convinced that none of the people in the audience for that entire event were ordinary people from the city and from around, you know, from Manhattan and all that. I bet they were all screened for their political leanings. I bet they were all invited to attend in advance. It was just unbelievable. What kind of things did she talk about in her speech? Did she come off as serious, like she really wants to make New York a safer place? Well, no. I'll tell you what she talked about in her speech. She was this is what she talked about in her speech. When I was 13 years old, I saw this beautiful red raincoat on the shop floor in Main Street, and I wanted to buy that raincoat, but my mommy and daddy couldn't afford it. So you know what I did? I saved up money, and then I bought the raincoat by myself, and it made me realize that nothing is impossible as long as you put your... That's what she said in her speech. It's like, are you fucking kidding me with this blah, blah, blah? How detached, how tone deaf do you have to be to bring up this crap? Like tax cuts for the middle class and help with mortgages. Like, that's the biggest concern on people's minds right now after seeing a woman fucking burned to death in a train. I didn't even vote for the bitch, and I'm still disappointed. I couldn't anyway, because I'm not an American citizen. Okay? But, yeah, it's, you know, it's typical. It's like all politicians are like this. It's like how, you know, like in the wake of the Southport attacks and the riots that followed, you know, when Keir Starmer gave his speech on live television, and he condemned the far-right thuggery. He didn't once mention, you know, the spark, the incident that caused it, the fact that this maniac with immigrant parents from Rwanda, who was most likely a jihadi terrorist. We don't have the proof that, although we have reason to suspect that That's probably what led him to do it. Oh yeah, speaking of which, the trial for that is actually taking place today, on the same day as the presidential inauguration. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself there. Yeah, he didn't once address the issue that actually mattered. And that's what all these politicians do. They talk about everything except the relevant stuff. They create this completely false perception of events, like how things are going. I don't know how they manage it. I don't know how they can juggle these lies, how they can suspend the disbelief of their audience. I don't know how they look in the mirror when I don't know how they keep a straight face when they do it. But I guess politicians, all politicians now at this point, they're all basically the same caliber of people. These are the kinds of people who sleep like a baby the following night when someone is violently murdered, and they're technically responsible for it, because make no mistake, I 100% believe that Kathy Hochul and Andrew Cuomo as well, they're the ones responsible for the horrific subway crimes that have been happening recently by turning New York into a sanctuary city full of all these dangerous criminal lunatics from all parts of the world, you know, all the filth, like in the movie Scarface, where they dump all the, where Fidel Castro gets rid of all his criminals from Cuba, communist Cuba, and they come to America and they just make America into a shitty place. That's basically what's going on, and that's why New York is out of control. Anyway, let's put ourselves in the shoe of a governor. Now, I don't claim to be a politician. I'm not making myself as though I'm an expert. I want to be 100% clear on this. I'm not saying that I could necessarily do a better job. But the first step to dealing with a problem is admitting that there is one. And the second step would be being frank and candid, because you might want to solve the problem, you might not succeed, but the important thing is that you're honest, and that you let the people know that your heart is in the right place. And obviously, what I would do if I were in her position, again, I'm not making myself out to be as though like I'm better than any person who's in an official government position. Like I can do a better job. I realize it's a heavy job, it comes with a lot of responsibilities. I'd probably melt and flake out and resign the next day. But what I would do is I'd address the problem at the source. I'd realize the guy who killed Debbie Kwan was an illegal immigrant. Most of those strap hangers that push people in front of the New York train cars are these mentally ill homeless men. All the illegal immigrants, I'd just get rid of every single one of them. They have zero right to be here. I have zero sympathy for them. If you want to come to America, there are legal ways to do it. And even then, you don't, nobody said you had a right to come to this or that country just because you're poor. Like, Jesus Christ, most people are poor. That's just the way, most people are poor and lack opportunities, but that's not their problem. You know, that's not the fault of the American government. You owe it to yourself. If anything, we should be encouraging these immigrants to thrive and prosper in their own communities. And if they do want to, you know, immigrate, well, they should have marketable skills that are useful, that help the economy, and they at the very least they should have a clean criminal record, and they should respect and understand the laws and the culture of the land. That's the bare minimum stuff. I actually have way more views on immigration than just that, but anyway, that's yeah. So get rid of all the illegals and the homeless people. Well, I'd lock them all up indefinitely, but those who are completely beyond reform, honestly, I just execute them. Look, I don't believe in human rights. I just don't. It's a really silly idea. It's an idea that sort of gained traction after the Second World War, where, you know, we wanted to protect people from persecution and genocide. But look at how over the years that the concept of human rights has broadened well beyond the scope of its original intended focus. We're having these silly, idiotic discussions nowadays where we can't deport rapists from our own government, because from our country back to where they belong because of their feelings, or because they're gay or bisexual. most of the time that's not even that's nonsense anyway. So we're being taken for a ride. And what kind of civilization are we, collectively the West, if we value the human rights and dignity of criminals above the victims? We're not a serious civilization if we do that. Because criminal rights will always be secondary, in my opinion, to the rights of ordinary, hardworking taxpayers. And certainly, if you are the kind of person who thinks it's okay to set people on fire for no reason, then I don't give a damn about your rights. I don't give a damn about whether you're sane or insane. The fact of the matter is, you are an animal, and we need to get rid of you, not simply because of what you've done, but because of the fact that you are a threat, and you could easily do this again. And as I said in my last video, I am firmly convinced that Sebastian Zapata Khalil, the illegal immigrant who set that woman on fire, he most likely already has a criminal history. He's probably already done this before. And make no mistake, if he'd done something like that in his home country of Guatemala, well, we wouldn't even have heard it. His name, if you search his name on YouTube or on Google, it would appear in a snuff film website, and it would be very satisfying considering everything that's happened now. Anyway, I went off on a bit of a tangent there. But anyway, no, what Kathy Hochul, what does she plan to do about the rising crime? She did actually address the fact that there's an increase in crime, and she wants to make her citizens feel safe. So what's she planning to do? Well, she wants to allocate $77 million, I think is that number, to having an increased police presence on the New York subway. So basically, she just wants more policemen patrolling the subway cars. Now, if you don't really give much thought to politics, if you don't really understand the situation in New York City, you might think that this is a good idea. More police. I mean, if there's more police around, then criminals are probably less likely to commit crimes because they're being watched, right? However, in my opinion, this is not going to be an effective solution. This is like putting as they say, a plaster, a band-aid over a gaping wound. Really, all this is doing is addressing the symptoms of the problem and not the actual problem itself. Let's pass over the matter of whether or not the state can afford this extra, $77 million being spent on increased police security. Let's gloss over that. And let's also ignore the fact that the policemen, I think, they're being funded to patrol the subways from the midnight hours, so 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. But Debbie Kawan was murdered on 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. Anyway, let's ignore both those things. See, crimes like this, these broad daylight, horrific murders, like the ones that we've been seeing, they didn't used to happen, and we didn't used. There was a time when we didn't need an increased police presence to deal with this sort of crime because it was unthinkable. No one would even do it. And if it had happened, it would have generated such an outrage and such a scandal, like the nation would be collectively traumatized by it. Like we wouldn't be desensitized to this kind of violence, the likes of which we read about in the news or that we come across every now and then on the YouTube algorithm. I seriously, I don't believe that it's ever been this bad. People talk about how in the 1970s during stagflation there was a lot of crime in New York City, but I don't think it was as bad even back then, because you got to understand the psychology of people who live in big cities. The bigger the city is, it's not exactly an ideal hub for places where communities and kinship can thrive, especially if there's lots of different people from lots of different parts of the world living there. And I mentioned in my last video how there was an experiment done. I think there's been a bunch of experiments done where if you have an actor collapse on the side of the road in a small town or village, people will stop and ask them if they're okay. They'll call an ambulance. They'll tend to them exactly. But if the same thing's done in a big city, nothing happens. People just walk by them. And this is a unique kind of phenomenon that you only tend to see in a large city like New York, but you don't see in a smaller place, because cities are too big for people to know each other. Everyone's sort of competing for living space and resources. There's just no sense of community and kinship there, because it's a sprawling, the whole city. Cities are a constant chaotic flux. It's like a river of masses of atomized individuals. Nobody knows each other from Adam, and you cannot convince me that this is not one of the main reasons why nobody chose to intervene in the case of Debbie Kowam's killing. If anything, the business with Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely, if anything, that was an anomaly, because people like Daniel Penny, good old American patriots who won't stand for violent crime and will actually defend the innocent, those people are a rare breed, especially in a city. So essentially, by putting more police, by putting more of an armed police presence all over the cities, you're trying to put on a facade. You're trying to convince the public that you're in control of things. But really, the message you're actually trying to convey is that you can't maintain law and order without the threat of violence, without armed guards, without the police presence. It's a sign of masked decline. So really, what you ought to do is you ought to instill and inculcate among the people of the city good values and community bonds and kinship. And well, it's really hard to say how I'd go about doing that, but a good start would be getting rid of all the criminals, because the more criminals there are in a big city, and I do believe, by the way, I don't buy this silly argument that we can be driven to criminal behavior by circumstance. I believe most of us have a decent sense of right and wrong, and criminals are basically genetically distinct from the rest of us. Literally, I believe, right, if we rounded up like 10,000, I don't know however many criminals there are, maybe there's 5,000, maybe 6,000. These are all career criminal sociopaths. And literally, I think if we just rounded them all up, put them in prison, or got rid of them, or shot them, virtually all the crime would disappear by the following day. But to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, there's this one, back in the case of Daniel Penny, the guy who stormed the train and said he was going to kill someone, he was going to do something, Jordan Neely. All the media, what do they talk about when they describe Jordan Neely? They talk about how he's a homeless, mentally ill Michael Jackson impersonator. And none of them, they conveniently gloss over the fact that he had a huge criminal record. He'd been arrested 42 times. 42 times! I haven't been arrested once. I don't know anyone in my family or my neighborhood who's even been arrested once. And this guy's been arrested 42. How much of a fucking waste of space do you have to be arrested 42 times? If you've been arrested once or twice, the state should try and, instill corrective measures, to redeem you so that you can function in society. If you've been arrested more than 5 times, it's pretty clear you have an attitude problem by that point. But if you've been arrested more than 10 times, honestly, it's pretty clear that you're, you are the unrepentant criminal type who just thinks the rules don't apply to you. And what does that say about someone who's been arrested 42 times? That is we're well past the point of redemption and rehabilitation by that point. Just execute them. Society does not need these people. Just line them up against the wall and shoot them. Hang them. Do whatever. I don't even care if they haven't committed a serious crime like murder that warrants the death penalty. We should get rid of them anyway, because it would be good for society. Society would improve immeasurably as a result. I promise. But the governments, all Western countries around the world, all of our collective civilization, we just don't have the stomach to do this, because it would be considered inhumane. It would violate their human rights. Like that's the most important thing. Meanwhile, the human rights of the victims of criminal behavior, you know, like Debbie Kwam. Fuck them. They don't, screw their rights. Who cares about that, right? Anyway, I dragged this out for much longer than I needed to. But basically, yeah, Kathy Hochul's speech, it was a huge yawn fest. Really not worth anyone's time. And on a positive note, on a more positive note, as I briefly touched on earlier, today is the day of the US presidential inauguration. President Trump's going to be in charge of the country, and if what they're saying is true, I tune into this podcast called The Lotus Eaters, and they're quite positive and upbeat about Trump, and they are pretty convinced. A lot of people who I follow on Twitter, yeah, I use Twitter again, yeah, and YouTube, they're quite upbeat and optimistic. They think that this time he's got a crusader mindset. He wants to really sort out all the problems, and he's gonna come after all the illegal immigrant criminals. And he said in his last night MAGA address that he wants to give the death penalty to illegal immigrants who've committed murder. Now that would be a good start. It'd certainly be better than nothing. I mean, I'd be a bit disappointed if Sebastian Zapata Galil was given lethal injection, but at least he wouldn't be able to do that again. I mean, personally, I've already explained what I'd rather would done to someone like that, but if Trump has his way, and Trump he's not only is he in a position to give executive orders, he's also, he controls the Senate, the GOP controls the Senate, he has Congress and the Supreme Court. So it's possible that he might do a complete overhaul of the system. He might do, what Senator Palpatine did, and he might actually get rid of the corruption. And, well, I've already said I'm not overly enthusiastic about Trump because I was disappointed with what he did last time. But I guess everyone deserves a second chance. And who knows? We could be in for a treat. And speaking of incompetent governors, I've already talked about Kathy Hochul, but there's another governor who's also under fire right now. Under fire. Gavin Newsom, because of his premiership over the state of California, especially during the wildfires. It's crazy what that guy's been doing. He reallocated all the water resources away from the reservoirs, so like there wasn't enough left to fight the fires, and he did it to save this tiny little fish. Talk about priorities. And they had this ridiculous, silly, fat, black transsexual who said, if your husband is in a burning house, well, he probably shouldn't have gotten himself in that situation in the first place. It's going to be really satisfying if Trump is in a position to actually do something about these people. Because even if they were elected, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're fucking shit at their job. They have blood on their hands. They've caused so much damage and destruction. Honestly, heads need to roll for the shit show that was 2024. These criminals need to answer for their crimes. And if Trump can bring any sense of law and order back to the United States and turn it into a functional society and civilization again, well, I'd be happy. I think we'd all be happy. And I'd probably invest in the S&P and the Dow Jones, because America's future would probably be good. Anyway, I've rambled on quite a lot. I'm probably going to focus about a bunch of other things now, because I've railed off on the state of New York, America, and Kathy Hochul long enough. Also, I'm running late, so I've got to finish my collection. See you.